Welcome to today's webinar, Contain and Isolate Ransomware, brought to you by Citrix and eMedia. I'm Stephanie Forston, and I'll be your moderator today. Ransomware is one of the biggest nightmares facing IT today. Hackers are targeting organizations of all kinds with malware designed to encrypt crucial data and hold it hostage until payment is made. Are you reducing your attack surface so ransomware attacks are minimized? Can you quickly recover? Today, you'll hear 4 ways organizations can reduce their exposure to the ransomware threat, recover encrypted data more quickly, and get employees back to work. Joining me today is Lauren Lazurka, Senior Technical Marketing Manager at Citrix, and Scott Lane, Distinguished Engineer, U.S. Enterprise at Citrix. Before I hand it over, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. Your slides will advance automatically throughout the event. A Q&A period will follow the presentation. I would like to encourage everyone to ask any questions you may have by using the question box on the left side of your screen. And we will do our best to address all the questions during or at the end of the presentation. The console you are looking at is customizable. You can move and resize any of the windows you see open, as well as explore the widgets at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, an on-demand presentation will be available after the event. All attendees will receive a link by email within 24 hours of the event. So with that, Lauren, over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. So this here is not a message anyone wants to see when they're booting up their computer, but it is what thousands saw exactly 1 month ago on June 27th as part of the Petya attack. Ransomware has come a long way just this decade, from scareware, police trojans, to last year's CryptoLocker and CryptoWall ransomware. And actually, 2016 was dubbed by some as the year of ransomware. Innovations in ransomware, such as affiliate programs, ransomware as a service, with live chat and email support, have made paying the ransom a self-service procedure. And now we're starting to see more of growth in the ransomware as a service, which will reduce the skill barrier for these attacks. In fact, researchers from NYU and Google are tracking at least 34 different families of ransomware, and each has multiple strains. And although there are many strains, they tend to use similar techniques, using exploits in Flash and Java, SMB, unpatched systems, and some zero-day attacks. And these attacks have extorted tens of millions of dollars in the form of digital currencies like Bitcoin. In fact, just yesterday, there was an arrest in Greece. The FBI arrested a Russian man who allegedly laundered $4 billion worth of Bitcoin through a Russian Bitcoin exchange named BTCE. Allegedly, 95% of the ransomware transactions that the research team tracked flowed through this Bitcoin exchange. And that's over $25 million in the last 2 years alone. So if anyone's actually had a chance to look up this Bitcoin wallet address down there in this image, there are only about 4 Bitcoin sent there, and there's a good reason for that. It's mostly because of the way the Petya attack was designed. So what's started off as a consumer and end-user problem that opportunistically targeted individuals has exploded into a threat that actually came to a frenzy with WannaCry and NotPetya in May of this year. So this is a snapshot of on May 16th during a 24-hour period where it's tracking the spread of WannaCry. As you can see that even most of the remote places in the world are not spared. These attacks have caused mayhem and lost productivity. And tracking the Bitcoin wallets, this attack specifically, WannaCry attack, only collected about 52 Bitcoins, which is about $130,000 US. When we're looking at WannaCry and Petya, so I'm going to spend a couple minutes looking at these 2 attacks. WannaCry consumed news cycles, but had only moderate impact, right? When we look at the effects, there was a kill switch that was found pretty quickly. It drew a lot of attention because of the way it spread very quickly, very far, spread very fast. It has a cryptoworm inside that includes a transport mechanism that automatically spreads itself. And the transport code scans for a vulnerable system, uses the eternal blue SMB exploit to gain access, and another tool, double pulsar, to actually execute a copy of itself. So it actually hit 230,000 hosts in about 150 countries within days. Now, NotPetya is a little bit different. It's actually still causing a bit of mayhem. In one organization, it affected 15,000 servers and about 50,000 endpoints. And what's different is that it's not really technically a ransomware. It wasn't designed to make money, but to spread fast over the internal network and cause damage. And some have called it a wiperware. And based on the location and timing of the initial attack, some are speculating that it may actually been a political attack riding on the media hype of WannaCry. But similar to WannaCry, it used the same Eternal Blue exploit, which is a memory-based attack, and it wormed throughout the internal network and spread very quickly within organizations. And something to note is that Eternal Blue was released into the wild as a 0-day, and a patch was actually available for a couple of months for many of the operating systems affected. Mostly Windows 7 took the brunt of the attack. And as you'll see later, there are countermeasures against memory-based attacks like Eternal Blue. And there's a lot of example horror stories from organizations with thousands of systems down that are losing millions of dollars a week and during this recovery phase. And I think Scott has a couple more examples.
Yeah, Florin, absolutely. And let me just preface this by saying, you know, as a former in-the-trenches IT guy, gosh, this would just be my worst nightmare. And my heart goes out to the frontline guys and gals who are fighting this when it happens to them. So out of respect, I'm not going to share any company names. Obviously, if you want to Google and go find them, they're out there. But, you know, some of the examples that I looked at, when the attack of Petya hit one of the companies on the 27th, it impacted them to the point where literally they were crippled beyond what it would take to pay the ransom to get access back to their critical files and data and systems. They were crippled at a point where, you know, just the day-to-day running the business was brought to a halt. And if you think about that, we are so dependent upon our IT infrastructures just to keep the lights on in our enterprises these days. In this particular case, I did go out and look at Yahoo Finance just to see what was going on with the stock. And at a certain point, the company did give a press release. On the day that press release occurred, you can see in the stock ticker how their market cap just basically fell. And the stock price went down. And I'm no stock expert, but I did the math myself. And in just one day, there was over $2 billion in market cap for one company that I looked at alone. So obviously, this just has huge, huge impacts. So I want to go on ahead and show you guys here. We actually do have a poll question for you, and that is, have you had a real instance of ransomware attack? And we will go on ahead and let that sit up there for a little bit, let everybody have a chance to respond to that. We encourage you to respond. It's totally confidential, okay? Are you scared of it? Have you had an instance? Do you fear that it could impact you? And the answer we tend to get with a lot of companies that we talk to is that, that they are concerned about it. If you're not sure, please as well answer not sure. We'll push these results out here in just a moment. But the bottom line is none of us are immune from it, and a lot of it is because of just what we deal with in IT today. So I'll go on ahead and share this out here. We have at this point here, let me push this out so that you guys can see it. There we go. There we go. I can get it there. There it is. Thank you. Sorry about that. Took me a minute to get it there. You can see the ranking there. It's about equal, right? And some people are not sure. Some say they haven't, you know, about 50-50 on who's seen it and who has not. Obviously not a scientific poll, but very much front of mind for everybody here. So how are we at this point? What is happening in our world today? Well, the world is really when you think about it, from the IT perspective, we're under attack. And this is not something that, I ever thought of back in the day whenever, I began my career in IT. I balanced everything around how can I make lives better for users. But now we have to balance that around how can we make lives better for users, but at the same time, protect the most important assets of the enterprises that we represent. So the world is absolutely under attack. And if you look at what people are saying, Citrix and Ponymon recently got together for a survey. And we found out that 80% of the companies we surveyed are very concerned about data breaches. 74%, I want to dwell on this for a moment, say that there's just a need for them to find a better way to secure their IT assets. We live in a different world, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, but the days of everything set in my data center and I fortified it with a good perimeter firewall, those days are gone because of the way that technology is applied to the way we do business and the way we live our lives today. 49% of the respondents said that they actually do admit that they could be at risk for a denial of service attack. And then the one thing that really hits me on this slide, in this study, I've been in this industry a very long time, and never before have I seen numbers like this, that $1 trillion is expected to be spent on cybersecurity in the next 4 years. I can't think of a time that there was a trend in IT or an initiative in IT in the industry that drove that kind of spending so quick, unless maybe it was a transition to a new version of Windows that we experienced a few years ago. And if you think about it, what's happening in our world today? Well, first of all, if you look at where things are, I commented that obviously not everything lives in our data center anymore. But if we unpack this whole thing, we can see that technologies more and more are moving off-prem, and they're moving into the cloud. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. Obviously, user experience is one. IT wanting to get out of the cost of maintaining things like CRM on site, so maybe they look at something like Salesforce.com, move it off to an off-site, reduce their footprint on site, move from an OpEx to a CapEx to an OpEx type model. People also bring their own clouds in, and we have some shadow IT that's going on. Box and Dropbox, everybody seems to run SharePoint. There are still some on-prem things like Exchange and so on and so forth, but even some of that is going out to the cloud. The bottom line is it's getting harder to secure all of this stuff when it's moving around to different locations. And it's not just the environments or the sources of IT that's moving around. The users are more mobile. They're using different devices. Things are constantly changing. And the old model of IT, well, guess what? To try to keep up with that, it got pretty complex, and it doesn't necessarily work today. And that's where Citrix comes in. And what we bring to the table is an innovative approach, one that's been tested many times over the years. I've talked to customers over the years that have used this very model, even a decade ago, to secure some of their most important assets. But it's very relevant today as we start to see things come in from different sources and different clouds and different locations on different devices. Our approach is the software-defined perimeter. And think of it this way. The security boundary is not the perimeter of the network. The security boundary follows the user wherever they are on whatever device they happen to be using. It's a software-defined perimeter, very different from that hardware perimeter that only protected or fenced off your network. Today, users hop across numerous devices over different networks, public networks, private networks, and that very thing, combined with the fact that the sources that they're reaching to for data and applications and so on and so forth, that negates the effectiveness of the older security practices. And that's why we need this new security model that the people we surveyed suggested. Now, we're focused on ransomware in this webinar, but I want to point out that this software-defined perimeter can help mitigate other threats as well and ensure intellectual property is contained inside the security zone where it lives. Yet the users have access to it on virtually any device, virtually anywhere, anytime that I enable that access. The software perimeter combines the secure access to the apps and data with contextual control, visibility, and behavioral analytics across the devices, numerous networks, different clouds. By extending control beyond the traditional data center to mediate user interactions with apps and data, IT can proactively secure, detect, and mitigate risk with intelligence applied to each scenario. So whether it's a cloud technology coming from one of many clouds or whether it's a traditional on-prem technology or mobile technology, what we find is that users just need access to it all in one simple contextual way, and that's precisely what we do. I do want to call out an example here. One of the cloud services that we show on this slide, one of our sales engineering managers used to work for that organization. Now that cloud service, in respect to them, I'm not going to call out their name, they do have it enabled by default that you could walk up to any browser on any machine and type in their URL, and if you have a valid password and security credential, you can get right in. However, at this particular company, the very company that delivers that cloud service, their employees actually come in through a Citrix Secure Digital Workspace, a software-defined perimeter. They have controls set up so that the only way in is through a secured browser off of a Citrix-delivered service, and obviously that's for security. The most important thing for people when they go to access all of these things is a unified experience that enables them access to their workspaces. It needs to be familiar, fluid. From the moment they get into the workspace, they need to feel like they have access to everything they need. And as IT, we need to feel like we're in control and have it all under security controls. And with the Citrix software-defined perimeter, that's what we provide.
All right, so you're affected by ransomware, right? So paying the ransom is kind of unappealing. It's an unappealing prospect, but tactically speaking, it may be the only viable option if there's not a strategy around prevention and quick recovery. So there are some unintended consequences from paying this fee, right? So it's not only just incurring a cost, but also rewards criminal activity. It strengthens the incentives of these attacks, and there's actually no real guarantee that the data will be recovered, right? So it's possible that it's like Petya, where it's whiteware, or it might be even leakerware, where the data is actually stolen, encrypted and stolen, and potentially another extortion is set up so that the data isn't revealed publicly. So paying should not be plan A, and what we want to look at is a strategic approach to building an architecture that is designed around preventing as well as containing and then recovering from the ransomware as well. So the goal is to reduce the attack surface. And the top two apps that are targeted by the ransomware are the web browser and the email client. We'll cover these points in more depth through the rest of the webinar, but let's go through a couple of them step by step. So we want to publish a virtualized sandbox and hardened web browser. The goal is twofold. One is to shield web app users and then additionally keep the sensitive data off of the endpoint. Also, we want to publish email clients to prevent the email-borne ransomware. And at the same time, we're protecting from ransomware on mobile devices with containerization and whitelisting and device compliance checks. For the data, which is the VIP, we want to protect with an enterprise-grade file sync and sharing platform, a content collaboration platform. And lastly, we want to take advantage of the Bitdefender and Zen server integration to prevent these unknown and known attacks. So we got another poll coming up now. And the question is, how vulnerable is your organization to a ransomware attack? What is your feeling on this? And I'll give a couple more minutes to get an idea of where we are with this poll. All right, so you feel very vulnerable, somewhat, not very, or not sure? Alrighty. About 5 more seconds, and then we'll push forward. So what we're looking at is about 7%, 8% look at very vulnerable, some are somewhat, 43% are somewhat, not very, and not sure. All right. So let's start on the next section, and that's the first step is shielding users of web apps. Now, as I said before, the web browser is one of the highest attack surface, and the reason is there's just so much to do with it. There's active content, there's Flash, there's Java, there's any number of plugins. So our goal here is to reduce the attack surface and contain the blast radius of potential incidents, right? So when we look at the industry, so we have a quote here from Gartner analyst Neil McDonald, who actually has a very colorful statement. We want to isolate users from the internet cesspool with remote browsing. And we've been doing this in high security environments for years using XenApp servers that are in dedicated security zones that are just for web browsing. And we see this separation requirement that's being mandated from governments in countries like Singapore and Japan. They're creating an internet separation to reduce the malware threat. Now, when we look at this diagram here, there's different ways to do this, including providing no direct internet access or restricting which user or browser or location has access. Traditional IT typically just does not provide sufficient protection against ransomware. And the reason is, from a security architecture perspective, the problem is that the most valuable asset, the data, is stored or co-located on the same devices and the same network segment as the most vulnerable asset, the endpoint. So and we got high value information, high value data on low value assets. And anything that's unprotected, or any of the users that click on a phishing email or download an attachment or open up an attachment can lead to a security incident that will spread throughout the network. So working with this architecture, even if malware is successful during an initial infection, it will reside in a non-persistent, isolated zone where it can easily be destroyed. So let's look at the connection flow from left to right. So we have untrusted devices connecting from internal or external networks. They're connecting through a gateway. They're connecting through this proxy. This is where we do the authentication, strong authentication with multi-factor authentication. We're doing federation potentially. We're also doing endpoint analysis to check for device compliance. We check for rogue processes, patch levels, and with Citrix Analytics, we're looking at end-user behavior as well. Then through XenApp, we provide multiple browsers for specific use cases: internet access, confidential network access, and intranet, for example. And consider the scenario where the browser may not even be in your data center, but in the cloud as a service on Microsoft Azure, for example. So when you combine the capabilities with NetScaler, XenApp, and then throw in NetScaler Secure Web Gateway, we add a forward proxy that can use website reputation to filter internet browsing, so external internet browsing as well. And this all sits on top of XenServer with Bitdefender, which provides a foundation for detecting and stopping the malware, so before the actual exploit takes hold and the payload is delivered. So we'll cover this section in more detail in a few more slides. Now, secondly, similar to publishing hosted web browsers, you can use XenApp to deliver a virtual email client, so published email clients, to protect against infection that comes from the email links and attachments. Now, when we're looking at the email client, it can be a traditional native client such as Microsoft Outlook. It could be web-based email, including Google and Office 365. Publishing the email client ensures that all of the required security settings are configured and consistent for all the users to the specific use cases. So there's things like disabling macros, having the antivirus, having DLP, data leakage protection enabled, whitelisting, and other technologies that are integrated with the email application, and then they're not endpoint dependent or endpoint limited. And since we're only transferring the pixels representing the email app, they're the only things that are sent to the endpoint, not the actual messages or the attachments or any other data, then we're limiting the ransomware it doesn't infect the end user's computer, and it doesn't gain a foothold within the enterprise or the network, and it doesn't spread at that point as well. But let's not forget about the server-side prevention and recovery. So using provisioning services for single image management to quickly patch all systems, and then using non-persistence machines for fast recovery and centralized management to improve response times, right? So if the ransomware, the malware gets through all of the defenses, how do you get rid of it quickly? Use PVS to go back to reboot the image, and you're back to a clean golden image. Scott, I think you have some thoughts on this slide as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's the big key, right? For many, many years, we've actually had this protection right there, and I want to make sure it's driven home exactly what Florin just said. Anytime we deliver a service from a Zen app or a Zen desktop environment, and we're using a lot of the tools that we have available to us, like machine creation services, for example. You called out provisioning services, Florin. Also, I want to call out the new app layering from the acquisition of Unidesk. These all apply here because in the event that a user is in a running OS, either in an application published through Zen app or a desktop delivered in this environment, and they're led down that path and they're tricked into something like ransomware, and the ransom takes hold and encrypts and locks all the files that are available to them, the solution is very simple. It's reboot the OS that they were in, because the image itself is read-only, and it goes back. Now, in the event, to what Florin said, that they happen to get through to maybe some of the files that were available through ShareFile Drive Mapper, for example. ShareFile has a revert capability as well. And there's one other thing, Florin, I think is so important to note here, and I don't know if we've covered it well enough or not. I want to make sure everybody understands it. The exploit that caused this latest round of ransomware was discovered in a patch released by Microsoft on March 14th. We're talking about events that hit in May and June. Obviously, systems not patched. These single instance management technologies, the app layering technologies that are inherent in what we do at Citrix, makes having patched OSs much easier and available. So you're protected off the front end before any possibility of an attack occurs, because you had it patched and up to date. So that was the comment I wanted to add to that, Florin.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, that's huge in just the ease of management, ease of update, and the consistency of patch management, as well as the timeliness of patch management, is much faster than it is the traditional way. So the next
and no one can go to sleep tonight and know that every OS in their environment is patched when you're dealing with endpoint sprawl. But when you centralize the delivery of these Windows services, it's much easier to know that is the case.
Yeah, and just as an anecdote, I think part of the Petya attack, some of the delivery systems that were actually delivering the malware, those servers had not been patched, I think, since 2013. So patching is definitely required for sure. When we're looking at mobile devices, we see that mobile devices are definitely very prevalent in enterprises, and they're becoming more and more so. And it's one that I think will become a bigger attack vector for ransomware and other malware. Right now, it's currently in its, say, 2012, 2013 stage, where the level of ransomware targeting mobile devices are something like, hey, we're locking your device, we're going to throw a message on there, and it'll pretend it's coming from a law enforcement agency, and you have to pay a ransom. It's not as destructive. It's attacking a lot of the Android devices out there. It's not as destructive as endpoints that are workstations and laptops, for example. But it's coming, and it's already here, but it's got some room to grow. So it's time to get ahead of the curve on this one. And when we're looking for mobile devices, it really comes down to they're decentralized apps, they're decentralized devices, they're remote, they're roaming. So we're looking at traditional MDM and MAM, so device manager and application and benefits. So we're using we're trying to prevent those devices that do get infected from coming back into IT, coming back into the network, prevent a personal application or a device that gets infected from infecting corporate or losing corporate data as well. So we're talking about using whitelists to allow only specific applications to be installed, blacklists to prevent known bad applications. We're looking at making sure that the device is checked for compliance to not be jailbroken. Typically, a lot of the malware that's on a device happens to be installed when the device is jailbroken. That's the biggest threat that there is for mobile devices out there. The containerization, whitelisting, and compliance checks are the biggest things for mobile devices. When we're looking at data, and Scott touched on it slightly a little earlier, we're looking at the data, and the data is right. That's what we want to protect. That's the VIP, the most important thing, and that's where it used to be that we lose our pictures or lose our songs, but now it's if you look at the Petya attack, a lot of the files that were encrypted were designed to encrypt business type files, so extensions that were Excel files. They're not looking for your JPEGs. They're not looking for your personal files. They were actually looking at encrypting business level applications or the data associated with them. So when our users can't access their files, right, so their work comes to a halt, and we can't serve our customers, development, production really can't proceed. So we typically end up where business simply can't function. And the scary side is that if a business can't function, it can't be profitable, and it could end up being one of those catastrophic type events where it could put smaller businesses or businesses without the resources to recover completely out of business. So what do we do for data? We're looking at, let me back up one slide. We're looking at ShareFile, right? So we're looking at enterprise data sync and sharing, and got two major aspects. One is that we have versioning, so we can recover the version previous to where the files are encrypted. So we're looking at, typically the ransomware goes in, it changes the extension, encrypts the file, changes the extension, and you're done, right? So we can recover that. We can go back multiple levels on the file versions. We have the ability to go back as well to stop syncing if possible, if needed to, and then we also have the ability to detect that a file is getting encrypted and stop certain extensions from actually happening. So not only recovering from the encryption with a backup, but also detect that it's happening and stop it, and stop the syncing of that file as well. Additionally, we have both ICAP integration and API integration with some of the more popular malware and antivirus solutions out there, including cloud security platforms. And the one I'm showing here is Avanan, where we have, I believe, up to 40 different antivirus engines available. We have the ability to stop malware. It's got visibility into what's going on with the files as well. So Sophos, Symantec, and so forth. So the data is what you want to protect. And should the ransomware get so far to actually get into data, maybe it's hitting a local device that's a mobile device that's moving. You're in a cafe, you get hit, you're not in a desktop, or maybe your local machine. You can go back and recover those files as well. And I'm going to throw it off to Scott to talk about a security-driven design.
Yeah, Florin, I want to comment also. I think basically what you just covered with ShareFile is a good point, right? That we live in a world where it used to be that a lot of the people I talked to are like, the cloud? No way, I'm not going to move anything to the cloud. It's not secure, so on and so forth. But what we're starting to see is that whole pendulum has swung the other way, because as Florin just showed you, by moving things or using cloud services like ShareFile to store data, whether in a public cloud or a storage zone on-prem, you've actually enhanced the security by adopting cloud services. And we're seeing more and more of that as enterprises try to move away from trying to control everything themselves that's gotten out of control. So when we talk about the out of control, it kind of leads me into where I'm going next. And, I spend a lot of time in real world IT. And, what I'm going to comment on is you're only as secure as your weakest link. And sometimes that weakest link is so out of control. An example we'll give here is a study that we came across where 70,000 national health services, this is in Europe, devices that were in use in medical environments, could be affected. And we're talking about high-dollar magnetic resonance scanners, blood storage fridges, medical equipment, things that are fully functional, but they run older versions of embedded operating systems, or they have clients that are maybe not as up-to-date, and so on and so forth. And how do we deal with these sorts of things, right? Where, for example, you might have a piece of mission-critical software that has to run maybe on something that's a little bit more legacy or isn't as up-to-date, that could be a vulnerability for something security-wise, or maybe even could be a possibility for ransomware on that given OS that it has to run on. And where we go with that is a methodology that has been used time and time again, right? And that is where we basically rely on Citrix from the XenApp environments and also NetScaler to enclave these particular services, isolate them away from the rest of the network. And if you look at this design here, this graphic, it's something we've been doing for a very long time, but it's very appropriate today. For example, you have 3 different environments here with, sensitive data, sensitive applications, so on and so forth, but they're all in their own network enclave, firewalled off from each other with separate XenApp servers that deliver those applications out to the end user across any device, and basically they receive access through the Citrix receiver or storefront. In a desktop world, we could even put the icons on the desk. And the end user is not aware that when they launch these applications, they're actually in a security enclave. So if something happened and they were somehow or another phished or some sort of security thing went wrong, it is contained to within that particular enclave. And we can beef that up a little bit more if we look at this particular explanation of it right here, this diagram. If you'll notice off the front end, we have the Citrix NetScaler in place. And the NetScaler obviously is, without a doubt, one of my favorite devices because we can start to do some things here that are very, very good for enhancing our security posture. Smart access, smart control have been around for quite some time. And that's where we start to lock down not just what is seen from an application availability perspective, but how the user can interact with the application. All the different virtual channels that we present of that application to the end user. We can also, of course, then lock down the availability of the application on different things like the context of the user, where they are, what they're coming in from, how strong was their authentication, so on and so forth. Also, with the NetScaler in the middle there, we have NetScaler Mass. And when everything is flowing through there, if you think about it, we have the ability to analyze everything and be able to report up exactly what's going on as users access these given applications. And then the next thing that comes into play, and we've kind of hinted to this as we've gone through the webinar, and that is XenServer Hypervisor Introspection. If you have older applications or services that you have to deliver, and you're a little bit suspect of how secure they are, one of the things you can do is deliver it in this environment and host it on XenServer. And one of the things I heard from the folks at Bitdefender, we'll talk more about them here, just even in the next slide, is that even an old unpatched instance of Windows XP running on a XenServer hypervisor would probably have not fallen victim to the Petya and WannaCry attacks that happened recently. So more about that hypervisor introspection and Bitdefender. I think this says it all very well, and I had the pleasure of meeting Andre and talked to Andre quite a bit from our friends at Bitdefender. They're a Citrix-ready partner, and I'm very impressed with what they do, by the way. I'll just go ahead and say that. But Andre says it best, the hypervisor sees all. So zero-day exploits that leverage unknown vulnerabilities, they can be stopped dead in their tracks with HVI and then technology from partners like Bitdefender. And Bitdefender is the one that has this availability today. So how does it work? If you look at it, we're basically running virtual machines on top of the Zen hypervisor, Zen server hypervisor, and our direct inspect APIs we hand off to a company like Bitdefender, and they have a technique-based detection. It's seeing up into what's going on, looking at the memory access, and it sees patterns of activity, detects suspicious memory behavior. And here's that point I made earlier. HVI could have stopped WannaCry on an unpatched Windows XP machine, and obviously I hope nobody's running XP, but unfortunately I still hear about it once in a while, if it were on a Zen server with HVI and Bitdefender. So how does this work, and how does it compare to traditional approaches? I'm not saying that you should just not run traditional antivirus on things that you virtualize by any means. Had a great discussion. I just got back from Black Hat USA, and I had a great discussion with some of the guys at Bitdefender, and they really helped me to understand this even more, and I want to share with you what I learned from them. If you look at it, traditional antivirus that we've all ran forever protects the file system. It doesn't necessarily look as much at memory as is common with the browser vulnerabilities that are out there. But hypervisor introspection, as you probably have seen here, it's looking from the bottom up into all the virtual machines and seeing the access to the memory and being able to stop attackers from getting a foothold on the system by the patterns that they're doing. Also with traditional antivirus, it can be attacked from inside the VM. It requires, basically requires software in the VM, and it has to be up to date. With hypervisor introspection, this all runs from a virtual appliance, if you will, that's on the Zen server and looking at the memory access. There's not an agent inside the VM. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you, and I'm sure my friends at Bitdefender would agree with me, that doesn't mean we don't run traditional antivirus and rely totally on HVI. But the two together are much more fortified than just running traditional antivirus alone. If you look at traditional antivirus, it relies on spotting patterns. And it's basically a listing approach. And, it's only really, I think, as good as your antivirus updates, right? But again, what HVI is doing, it's detecting the attack techniques. It's looking for things that we see as sinister, not normal, and blocking them in their path. Now, it's something we want to show you. It's something that I am very, very impressed with. And in fact, some of the smart guys at Bitdefender have set up an attack sandbox, if you will, where they could actually execute some attacks and show you what it looks like. And rather than try to show that to you live, we put together just a short little minute or so video, and I want you to tune in and really watch this right now. We put a narration on it for you so that you could follow along. This, to me, is very interesting technology, so we'll go on ahead and launch that video for you right now.
Internet browsing has become a large risk factor. All it really takes is for an employee to click on a seemingly innocent web link delivered in an email. Add on a vulnerability such as an unpatched plugin like Flash, and the user's computer is attacked with malware. What's worse, the attacker now likely has the ability to access the infected computer and launch processes and access sensitive data. This is where the widespread attack begins, as the attacker won't stop with just one machine. He will literally move laterally, infecting other resources in the network, and ultimately stealing sensitive data or holding it for ransom. Citrix provides a solution by running a secure browser as a service. When browsing the web, employees use a browser that is published on XenApp, which is hosted on XenServer. XenServer provides additional protection by allowing hypervisor introspection, along with our Citrix-ready partner, Bitdefender. This provides an additional layer to protect against zero-day attacks. In this second example, when the employee clicks on the same infected link, XenServer and Bitdefender work together to detect an attack that normal antivirus solutions would not be able to catch. Bitdefender is able to detect the hacker's technique by analyzing what is running in memory on the XenServer guest.
All right, so we actually have a few more videos that are available, and some actually show the Eternal Blue attack that's actually running before and after. So those are available online if you Google them or if you go to Bitdefender's site. I do want to have a couple of slides on some customer testimonial stories where this healthcare specific customer was seeing ransomware, and after implementing the solution, they've been able to block, I believe, their number 99.99% of the time. So they're definitely seeing the benefit. We have another customer that said that the day after WannaCry hit, they got an email from the Bitdefender team encouraging them to have a nice weekend and assure them that they're protected. So they're seeing the benefit of the solution specifically for this attack. So this is not an attack that was 2 or 3 years ago. This is stuff that's happening within the last couple of months. A few more slides, and then we'll jump into a Q&A session. I do want to call out, there's a couple of questions that I'm looking at in the queue that about some best practices and user education and so forth. So we do have a system hardening guide that's out there that we co-authored with Mandiant, which is the consulting service for FireEye. I do want to mention that user education is key. People need to understand that somewhat be suspicious of links, of attachments, understand that zip files and executables should be looked at more carefully. Education is key. However, people want to do their work. They're trained to do their work, and there will be people that click on things that they should not click on, and we can't hold that against them. But it's something that should be part of a security program. When you're building your environment, you're building your XenApp environment, building your VDI environment, do your best to not run these systems in administrator mode. A lot of the ransomware out there, including the one that was the payload and the exploit that for WannaCry, required admin access. If you run VDI sessions in non-admin access, reduced the privilege, it's going to throw another obstacle in the way. They're going to have to try to find a better way to do privilege escalation. And this one, they're catching passwords from the network. So there's reducing the privilege of these applications, and the desktops will go a long way as well. And again, disabling macros and active content, do it consistently. It'll throw another barrier up. Move from blacklisting to where you have to identify specific known bad sites to a whitelisting scenario. As the business requires it, whitelisting is a bit more tedious because you have to go through everyone and allow good sites. Sandbox the email client and the browser, and then obviously harden the OS and critical application. Right? So a lot of this is contained within this guide. How to prevent jailbreaking of applications, how to prevent routing, network boundaries jumping as well. And I know for a lot of organizations, a lot of IT, there's simply not enough time in the day to do an assessment and remediation of these hardening requirements. So I do want to mention that Citrix Professional Services has an assessment, hardening assessment. It's called a digital workspace security assessment. It looks at vulnerabilities, redundancies, and best practices in your digital workspace. And there's also offerings for network access strategy and protection, and then network monitoring and insight. So I want to go and do a recap. This is the call to action, your key takeaways. They're the same ones that we talked about in the beginning. So you want to reduce the attack surface, contain the blast radius. We're looking at publishing your email browser, your email client, and your web browser. We want to protect those mobile devices with containerization and blacklisting, whitelisting, and using device compliance checks. Check for things like rooted devices. We want to protect your data, and we want to leverage Bitdefender with Zen Server to actually prevent the payload to be executed in the first place. With that, we're looking at the Q&A section here. Let's go ahead and begin. So there was a question here around how do I prevent network boundary hopping or routing. So specifically to this attack, you'll see that it was spread through SMB. So there's SMB ports that are very common, that are 1445, 135. We want to move away, or as Scott mentioned earlier, firewalled off network segment security zones. In general, there's a lot of these flat networks that allow fast lateral movement from one segment to the other segment. They're not firewalled. They're pretty flat. We want to actually create more security zones that restrict the ports that are open, the IP addresses that I have access to. So that is one aspect. I see there's a comment around security awareness is the best approach. Security awareness is definitely a high priority. It's something that we do internally. It's something that every organization should have a program around. Awareness of phishing emails, awareness of ransomware that's happening, and it has to be quick, it has to be timely.
You know, Florin, it's interesting you mentioned about the employee training and awareness. I just came back from Black Hat, and one of the presentations I sat through, there's another company out there, and their whole business is around enabling users to recognize a possible attack, training users about what a possible attack looks like, making it easier for users to report possible phishing attacks, and as well rewarding them for good behavior of reporting and avoiding phishing attacks. So, training and arming your end user community with knowledge certainly goes a long way in this whole thing too. I think it's very, very much worth mentioning.
Thanks. Yeah, so I see another one around a question around would we recommend having a no ransom policy for large companies that sets a standard? It's not something that I could really send an opinion. I know, or give an opinion. I know certain law enforcement agencies have gone back and forth on whether people should pay or not. The way I see it from a security standpoint, I want to have every tool in my box available. It's kind of a so should we keep a stash of Bitcoins? We did a survey at Citrix of some companies, I believe 250 companies, 500 companies in the UK. We found that half of them do keep Bitcoins on hand because they want to have a backup method just in case they do need to recover their data. So it's another tool in the toolbox. I would say from a security perspective, it's hard to say for me to tell an organization what their risk appetite is.
But we know it is happening that some companies have stockpiled Bitcoin just in case. We do know that.
Right, and we have some more great questions here that I just want to get through really quickly because we are about to run out of time. I have NetScaler Gateway. How do I lock down HDX to make remote connections more secure?
Well, I think I touched on that a little bit, and I want to make sure that is known. I talk to a lot of customers just like this, who have purchased NetScaler Gateway, have deployed it in order to give access to XenApp, XenDesktop environments. But what I see is they just have it in the ICA proxy mode, the basic proxy mode. And what they may not realize is that they, might have licensing to do more. And where I'm going with that is they could actually enable some of the smart control policies that will lock down things like client drive mapping, clipboard mapping, printing, so on and so forth, as well as if they have the licensing to use some of the smart access policies. Now, as we start to host more and more web browsers and email browsers in virtual environments, this could become pretty important because it'll help to contain not only intellectual property, but as Florin likes to call it, it will help to contain the blast radius by making the endpoint client nothing more than a pixel receiver, a KVM, keyboard video and pixel receiver, if you will, to the session.
Great. And so our next question here is, how can we beef up security with some of the new options for multi-factor authentication?
So this one doesn't play as much, I don't think, into the topic of ransomware, but I think it's important, right? Because we talk to customers all the time who are being asked, by some sort of regulatory compliance to make a given application have stronger authentication, but yet that given application only has a field for a username and a password. One of the things we can do is when we place that given application into one of those security boundaries that we talked about where we're hosting it on XenApp, is that we can, out of the box, enforce a multi-factor authentication. And we can use a variety of sources. A plug here that for something that just released, I think within the last week or so, on board with NetScaler today, built into the product, is a one-time pass token capability. So you can have an Active Directory username password, get the one-time token to your phone to get access to the environment, to go on ahead and get access to the applications that then in and of themselves may not have strong authentication mechanisms.
So I think you actually just covered this, but I'll ask it anyway, just in case you feel like there's anything you want to add. How can Citrix help me add additional authentication options to my application?
That's it.
That was that, wasn't it?
Florin, did I miss anything there?
No, so there's another aspect of this, which is the something newer to Citrix is the FAS, or Federated Authentication Services, and
yes.
It's out of the topic of ransomware, but it's the ability to have the end user bring their own identity, and then convert that into with SAML Federation. With Federation, have it converted to an internal account. So that way, the end user doesn't really know their password or even have a password per se. That's internal. So we can definitely look at that probably in a follow-up.
Stephanie, there is one question I saw in the chat log here that I would like to address, and it's one that I think is kind of important because, I talk to customers every day that, may be running, that aren't running Xen servers or hypervisor, and then they, see me talk about, if you isolate your email and browser activity off to a virtualized environment that has HVI and leverages something like Bitdefender, you're much more secure. Right now, that HVI, and for the perceived future, I don't know as though it will change, is a Xen server feature. And you have to do that with Xen server. But there is nothing saying, at Citrix, we're totally open to hypervisors. There's nothing saying that you can't have a silo of Xen server hosts that deliver these services and use something else to virtualize whatever else you have in your environment. But use Xen server for your most secure and most vulnerable activities. So you can absolutely mix and match. I'm a fan of Xen server, but I will, of course, call that out. Everybody does have their preference, and I know it's not always easy to do a wholesale changeover. But we're seeing a lot of uptick a lot of uptick in customers out there who are using Zen Server to deliver their Citrix infrastructures. This is one of the very reasons.
All right. Thanks so much, Scott, but I'm afraid we're out of time. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll follow up via email. Also, be sure to check out the Related Sources widget at the bottom of your screen to learn more about the topics we discussed today. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this special presentation of Contain and Isolate Ransomware. I'm Stephanie Forson, and on behalf of Flora and Liz Thurka, Scott Lane, Citrix, and everyone at eMedia, thank you for your time and have a great day.